Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
And here we are on a great pasuk, the 10th pasuk of the first chapter of Shemot. We already dealt with we spent a long time wonderfully on this Melech Chadash. Is it a real king? Is it just that the king changed his stance so that he could have a pretense to oppress the Israelites? And we talked about how the nouns Rav and Atzum, right, great and mighty, is what the Pharaoh thinks about the people now, and about how some of the other words, the Yishwatsu and the Yatzmu, that they swarmed out might be kind of perush on the actual data that he experienced as a swarm. And now we get to the first sentence of, if you'll excuse the, I think, apt analogy, the final solution, right? It's in verse 10 where Pharaoh lays out what his plans are. And I think last week we read it but didn't Rashi it. I'm going to read it through slowly just to get us into the groove. Hava nitchakma lo. Let us be wise with respect to him or it, singular. That's important because we're talking about the many Israelites. And Rashi's going to pick up on that. Let us do something chacham. Let us not be silly about. Let us be very sophisticated regarding him or it. Pain yirbeh, lest it or him grow. V'haya, and it will be. That's a vavaipuch. It's a past tense verb, but it's really intended to be future. Ki tikrena milchama, when or if a milchama comes upon us or is called. V'nosaf gam hu al sonenu, and then he or it will join, yes, also with or upon our enemies, those who hate us. V'nilcham banu, will fight us. Right, the banu here doesn't mean with us, but will fight upon us. Ve'ala min haaretz, and will rise up from the land. And we had many questions on this the last time that we put on the table before we got into the Rashi. Why is the reference to the Israelites singular, lo, as opposed to lehem, yirbeh instead of yirbu, nosaf as opposed to nosfu, gamhu as opposed to gamheim, etc. It's all in the singular. And we also played around with what could the Allah min haaretz mean, that the Pharaoh's fear is both that they're going to stay and grow and be numerous, but it also seems to be that if we understand Allah min haaretz to be referring to the Israelites, he's like, oh no, and they're going to leave. Oh no, they're going to stay and be mighty. Oh no, they're going to leave, right? And then we also talked about the fact that in beautiful premonition, the Allah min haaretz as the Pharaoh's fear is exactly what the first 20 chapters of the book of Exodus is about, the first 15 chapters. The only thing the Israelites are trying to do is dafka, the Allah min haaretz, but not because they've joined with the Egyptians' enemies and are trying to depart, but because of what the reason why they want to do aliyah min haaretz is because what he's about to do, right? So he's all jumbled up. And we also discussed, is there any other reference that the Allah min haaretz could be? So that's where we left it. They want to throw out another lingering question on the verse before we look at the Rashi. And we're going to do it like last week, where if you have a question, I know it sounds third gradish, but raise your hand so only one person can talk at a time. Marshall.
I like Robert Alter's translation.
A little bit louder, Marshall. You're muted a little bit.
I like Robert Alter's translation of the word nitkakma. Let us be shrewd with them.
Yes, right. That shrewd is great because there's something a little bit, sinister about shrewdness, or about the way that word is used. I'll read you, since we're doing translations, Everett Fox. Come now, that's the Hava. Let us, and you know how Everett Fox loves his hyphens, use our wits. In a hyphenated threesome, use our wits against it. He's very precise because the lo is an it, not a them. Come now, let us use our wits against it. He might be translated as if the it is the situation, not the people. Lest it become many more, and then if war should occur, it too be added to our enemies and make war upon us. Or he adds a very interesting or, not and. It doesn't say it an and. Or go up away from the land. As if Pharaoh's concern is either they're going to join with our enemies and fight us here, or they're going to become so numerous that we can't keep them here. We want them to be just numerous enough that they can be helpful to us, but not so numerous that they can use their majority clout and just leave. That's Everett Fox. Anyone else have an interesting translation of the pasuk? No? Barry, and then Norm?
A slight variation. It's the people. Introduced first as the people, Bnei Israel, becoming. From then on, it's referred to as him. Let us deal wisely with him, lest he increase.
Aha. Okay,
people,
so
he.
People, he. Norm, do you want to read your translation?
I think that it could mean with it, where it is referring to Am Yisrael, the people as a collective whole.
Yes.
Because Pharaoh, later, if not now, I believe is the first one to refer to us as a collective entity, as a people. This could be a premonition of that. Or it could mean the God of the Israelite people, or, as you suggested, the situation.
Good. So Am is a singular noun, right? It denotes many things, but it's grammatically a single noun. So it could be it the Am. Say more, Norm, assuming you haven't quote unquote cheated and read ahead, what it could mean if the it were God. Because you threw that out there. So just flesh that out a little bit.
I think that the idea that the people of Israel did not worship Pharaoh, did not worship the Egyptian gods in general, separates them in an important way. And he could feel that this God that he doesn't see is a rival. And in fact, I believe he is.
Yeah. Good. So let's hold that as a possibility as we're about to read the Rashi. Anyone else want to just read out an interesting translation in whatever book they have in front of them? Going once? Going twice? Okay.
I can't unmute it.
Now you're not muted. We hear you, Fred.
Oh, good. I was fighting with it somehow. Okay, very, very briefly, a little bit a grammar. Nitchakma is a form in biblical grammar called cohortative. And what that means is the verb is put in future, but it has a special ending, kamatz hey, and it gives to it, when you read it, it gives to it a little bit of kind of sarcasm, being smart in the sense of let us outsmart them. So it's not just a simple future tense, we will outsmart them, but it has this ending which makes it a little bit, we know what to do. We are going to, outsmart them. So that's about the word nitchakma because of this ending. And the other thing I want to say that we know about a term called collective plural, which are words that, like the word am, which can be a million people, but it's still considered one single form. And such words are in Hebrew like mishpacha. You can have 20 members in this family, but you constantly talk about mishpacha as a single feminine unit, tzava, there are others.
Right.
So I read am as single, but it's a nation.
Great. And let's go back to the first thing the Vered said, a beautiful grammatical point, that exhortative or cohortative form of a verb. You all know it. Hava nagila, right? There's something energetic and almost optimistic about the verb form. Or on Purim, Hava narisha, rash. Oh, let us go make noise.
Right.
So you go. It's like a rallying cry. So it's a rallying cry by a protagonist. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them.
Yes.
Right. There's some energy to the form itself. Very good.
Yes.
Okay.
Adam?
Yes.
Yeah. in all three of those examples, it was preceded by the word hava. It's like, let us. So that may itself be the rallying cry more so than the verb itself, or together they make it that rallying cry. Is there another example you can think of a rallying cry that's not preceded by hava?
I have to think through. By the way, Boker Tov, Barbara, so great to have you. It looks like you have beautiful light streaming in from your, Labriut, into your elbow, Barbara. I don't think she's hearing us yet. So I have to think, can I think of a use of that form that doesn't have a hava in front of it? I need to think about it. I don't want to waste time thinking about it now, but that's a good point. It might be that it's like a Q and a U, that they go together.
It's not only hava.
No?
It's just the form of a verb that we have. It's a form in grammar where the hava gives it a double thing.
I think there's like nishlacha somewhere that it's let us send.
Yeah, there are some examples. I can look for them also.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sue, will you be our guinea pig and read the Rashi?
I will read the Rashi. For the Hava Nitchachma?
Yeah, so we're on the Rashi on verse 10, top left corner if you're in our book, but it'll be somewhere else on a different book.
Okay. Kol Hava Lashon Hachana Vazmana Ledaber or
Ledavar, probably.
Ledavar Hu. Klomar Hazminu Atzmechem Lachem Lekach.
Right. So before you translate, what Rashi is focusing on first is not the exhortative form of the verb, but the hava itself. Okay. So
every hava is in the language of preparation and an invitation to this thing.
Right.
As in, hazminu etzmechem lekach. Hazminu, as in bring yourself. No. Preparation. Get prepared.
Right.
Yourself. Prepare yourself.
So, Alan, Baruch Shekivanta, Rashi is basically supporting your reading that it's the hava that is the rallying cry on top of the form of the verb. So when it's interesting that he's choosing to say this here, all out of nowhere, but every hava in the Torah is saying is a version of let's get ourselves psyched up to do this, right? It's a rallying cry. The different ways of translating hazminu atzmechem lachach, it could be get yourselves ready for this, prepare yourself for this, invite yourselves, really step up to the plate. So first he deals with the hava. We could pause and say, why? Like, what is significant to Rashi about what we're supposed to be feeling in this scene, such that Rashi is giving us this, every 50 or 100 Rashis, he gives us one of these. Every time this form is used, it means this. What is it adding to this scene by him expanding on the hava here?
I think it's kind of like what Bered said. Hava. It's a form of, rail. I think I think he's talking about the rallying cry.
Yeah, I hear, one second, Norm, I hear in Rashi's comment after he, even bigger than the word itself, sort of a cackle, like he's speaking to his inner crowd and energizing them for the task ahead, which is going to be devious and potentially challenging, and let's get ready. That's the hava here. Norm? You're muted.
The first time in the whole Torah that the word hava is used. And it also seems like it's because he's about to propose something that's really awful. It's kind of like he's getting ready to say, let's let all the old people go and die.
Excuse me.
For example.
Point of information.
Yes, Matt.
Hava is used earlier when he said Hava et ishti, says Yaakov to Lavan.
Right. So,
in a different sense, but
Right. So there is a form of hava that is more built from the ancient Hebrew Aramaic word meaning to give. Like in Aramaic, yahev is he gave, right? So havli et yadech means give me your hand. So there's a version of hava that is a request to be given something, hava et ishti. There's also a version of hava that is this. What's interesting to me is not only that this is not the first time that hava is used in the Torah, but rather that he says kol hava lashon hachana. Every use of the word hava is this, because it seems to be that that's not the case, right? Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, and hava is just meaning give or pass over to me. Okay, now actually move to the next one, Sue. Unless there are other questions on this.
Actually, the word hava is also found in Genesis chapter 11.
Marshall, it's so hard to hear you. Is there any way you can get closer to your speaker?
Got it. Actually, the word hava is also found in Rashi, in Parshat Noah. Hava nil bana leveini.
Aha.
Yisrefa.
Right. Good. So thank you for bringing that up. And so it's not only that this is not the first hava, it's not the first hava that means the thing that he says it means. So there's got to be some reason why Rashi is making that comment, that general comment here. I don't have that Rashi open in front of me. If someone wanted to check to see if Rashi said something interesting on that hava, that would be interesting. I don't have Breshit in front of me. What's the citation, Marshall?
Actually, it does say Azminu Atzmechem.
Does he give a language of like every use of the word hava is?
Kol hava l'shon hazmanahu.
Interesting. So maybe he's doing it once per book. Because that's the first time it's used in Breshit. Great. Marshall, there's something going on in your technology. It's extremely hard to hear you. So see if you can work on that while we move to Sue to start working on the next Rashi. Nitchakmalo.
Nitchakmalo le'am. I can't tell if those are all bold. No, they're not.
They're not.
They're not. Nitchacham ma la'asot lo. Rabotenu darshu. Nitchacham le'moshi'in. Moshi'an shel Yisrael nidonam b'mayim.
Probably not nam. Let us judge them.
B'mayim?
Mm-hmm.
Shekvar nishba shelo yavi mibul leolam.
Okay, so look how Rashi pretzelizes himself to come up with something which is fanciful but fascinating. Okay.
Let's be wise. Let's nitchacham lo. Let's be. I'm going to go with a translation, guys. I'm killing myself here. Let us consider wisely what to do with it, the lo.
Right. So first he says pshat. Pshat is, don't get confused by the singular preposition lo and not lahem. This is what several of you said before. It's lo la'am. Am represents many people, but as a singular noun. So let us deal wisely with him. Rashi concedes that that's pshat, right? Let us figure out the best way to handle it meaning the people. Okay. But he can't resist.
And the rabbis drashed it.
Right, in a source that we already met on the previous, on verse 8, the same place in the Talmud where we have in Masechet Sota, where it reads that this was a king who pretended not to know Yosef, right? In the same page of Talmud that it continues to interpret this verse. Yeah. And again, remember that the first time Rashi quoted that Talmudic source, he doesn't say V'rabotenu darshu. He doesn't give this sense of, our rabbis gave a drasha on it. It's not really pshat. It's interesting. He presents it as pshat. And now he says, I'm telling you what I think the verse means. What it means is that let us be wisely to the people. But there's a really great midrash that I can't help but share with you. And what is that midrash?
Hanidchacham lemoshi'an shel Yisrael. We're going to be smarter than the Mashiach of Israel.
Close, very close, right? Either smarter than, or outwit the Mashiach of Israel, not Mashiach, but Moshiach. Lahoshia, what does Lahoshia mean?
Deliver.
To deliver or save, right? So we're going to be smarter than the deliverer, the Redeemer of Israel. Who's the Redeemer of Israel?
God.
God, okay? So this is Pharaoh in this Midrash referring to God, as Norm said was a possibility. Nid chachma lo. Nid chachma lo. We're going to outsmart the author of this whole story, right? Just see how this is an enigma wrapped in a riddle, wrapped in a puzzle, because this is the rabbis imagining the Pharaoh trying to outsmart the God who is the author of this whole story and text, right? We're going to outsmart that God. How are we going to outsmart that God? Nedunam b'mayim. What does that mean?
We're going to sentence them to water. We're going to get like a dean. Like we're going to drown them.
We're going to drown them, right? So what we're about to do is eliminate or severely mitigate their numbers, and the sentence, the way we're going to carry it out is the water, right? That's the reference to what's about to come up, that all the firstborns are drowned. And how is that an outwitting? So far, it's just evil. How is that an outwitting? Aha, shekvar.
Shekvar nishba shelo yavim habu leolam. He's already sworn that he will not bring a big floody storm to the world.
So Pharaoh,
this assumes that Pharaoh read the story of Noah.
It assumes so many things. It assumes that Pharaoh knows the Noah story. It assumes that Pharaoh knows the Noah story so well that he knows that every rainbow he sees over Egypt is a reminder that the flood will never destroy the world. It also assumes something else, like subtle and kind of halachic. Can anyone tease it out? What else does it assume in order for this to make sense?
That shenishba, that the swear that God promises stuff and then doesn't go back on his promise.
You're getting there. In order for this to be an outsmarting of God, what does it assume, Tova?
It's assuming God will. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's assuming that God will punish in the same manner, punish with water.
Great. It's assuming midah k'neged midah. It's assuming like a rabbinic notion of the punishment fitting the crime, right? So Pharaoh says, I know from all of my study of Chumash and my mastery of rabbinic literature that in the realm of Jewish Israelite punishment, you only get punished with the thing that fits the crime in it, and if you do a sin by this, you'll get punished by this, right? So let's do a water sin. He can't punish us with water because he swore not to. He can't drown us. We can drown them. He cannot drown us because he's already made a promise. Okay. Let's kind of go around reactions to that, and then I want to read. Some of you may have a version of Rashi that adds another sentence here, and I want to read that as well. Tova, I see Tova's hand. I see. We'll go. So then Norm.
Okay, I think it's also particularly apt because Pharaoh is very closely associated with the power of the Nile, with the flooding of the Nile. So right. It's using his own power and the intrinsic power of Egypt itself.
Great. Norm.
I just think it's a simple, wonderful foreshadowing of what's going to happen to Pharaoh and his host.
Yes. It's harnessing what Pharaoh thought was his magical power, foreshadowing for us knowing that's actually going to be his downfall, which means he is going to get midah k'neged midah, right? So the very thing by which he thought he was outsmarting God is not going to happen. It's going to literally crash down on him. And Moshi'an shel Yisrael, the one who's going to save the Israelites through water, right? Anyone else on this so far? Who's down the bottom? Hey, Melanie. Boker Tov. So nice to see you. Oh, she can't hear. Hi, Melanie. How are you? Cantor fine. Okay. I brought this other version of Rashi that I have. It's called Pshuto Shel Mikra. It's a beautiful, simple elucidation of Rashi's commentaries in Hebrew with many footnotes. And does anybody in their comment of Rashi have other words here, either in parentheses or in a different type, before you get to the words of Va'ala min haaretz? Okay, so some of you have that. I'm going to read it out loud. This does not appear in our text, but
it does in mine.
It does in yours. Okay. In this book, it's parentheses, and it's associated with something called Berashi Yashan, the old Rashi. It's very interesting because our volume, right, the Torah Chaim, is a scholarly volume that has scoured all the manuscripts, and it gives us, Melanie, we're on chapter 1, verse 10 in the Rashi. Gives us the manuscript variants, tells us when, B'dfush Rishon Leta, we've seen that acronym, it's not in the first printing. And whoever edited our version of this Rashi makes no reference to these words, but several printings of Rashi have it. Here's what Rashi says, or what some pseudo-Rashi says. Vehem lo hevinu, they didn't understand, the they being the Egyptians, even though it's really the Pharaoh speaking. Sha'al kol ha'olam eno mevi, that, he wouldn't bring a flood on the entire world. He's not going to, what he promised to Noach is that he wasn't going to destroy the entire world. He never said he wasn't going to destroy you. Aval hu mevi al umma achat, but he is willing to destroy a single nation or to bring water on all of you. So, Pharaoh, you misread Breshit. What God said is that he would never destroy the entire world, but he never promised not to schmeist a single rotten, evil nation, right? So you overthought, or you underthought when you were thinking you were overthought. So it's also this kind of playfulness, what it means to be lehit chachem. Most times when we think we're being lehit chachem, right? It's a great form, and maybe Very can tell us even more about this. It's the reflexive of to be smart, to smart yourself, right? To consider yourself maybe smarter than you are. It's probably doomed to fail, and it kind of makes Pharaoh into not only an evil character, but almost a pre-Achashverosh character, right? He's foolish in his smartness. Barry?
It reminds us in the beginning of the Amidah, we're thanking God. Where does our knowledge come from?
Atachonin ladam dat. Good. It is you, God, who gives us the da'at, not our own, not only our own internal thinking. Great. Okay. In the copies that other people have that include those words, are there any other words there that I missed? Because there might be slightly different variations. Okay. So, we ready to go on to Va'ala min haaretz, or do people want to say more about this? Joel.
Can I go back? Because I want to say something about the last one.
Go back.
Nitchakma.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like Rashi is making a comment that the example of institutionalized anti-Semitism sort of requires the entire country to cooperate. That he's a pharaoh, that he could very well just issue a decree, but he has to rally the entire country onto his side in order for them to cooperate.
And you're saying that comes out even more in the Rashi and the words itself. This notion that where do you find that Rashi, or are you commenting on the Rashi or the pshat of the words?
The Rashi, where he's saying every time they use Hava, it's a way of rallying the people.
Yeah,
He wouldn't need to rally the people if he's just ordering a decree.
Yeah, that's great. If you have that totalitarian power, you shouldn't have to convince anyone.
Right.
Can I add on to that? Can you hear me?
Hey, Rick. Yeah, I can hear you, but I can't see you. It's been so long. No idea what you look like.
I don't have a camera on this computer. I got to get a different one.
We need to get like an avatar of you so we can see something when we're like, it could be like an avatar of like a pazer or something.
Yeah. Thanks.
Go ahead, Rick.
I also wanted to say along the lines of Joel that if Pharaoh had all this power, he wouldn't have to rally up his troops and convince them. And the evidence of that is later on with Shifra and Pua. They don't go along. They're Egyptian, and they don't go along with the Pharaoh. And it's not a monolithic Egyptian force against this, I think.
Great. You've put those two comments together, and you've linked something wonderful. That if it's true that in order to do something particularly devious, even an autocratic ruler like Pharaoh needs to get full buy-in, then it's also true, it's even more true, than the small resistance of a Shifra and Pua can stop the flood, pun intended. Barry?
Yeah, I want to go back to also previous week where this may be the same Pharaoh, and he is dealing with a people who are sorely angry in their circumstance after being taken for everything they have, and they're serfed now, and there's a potential of revolution, and this Pharaoh needs to do something to make himself powerful among his own people, and that's what this is all about.
Great. My mind is bringing me to a few years ago, before we went to England, Noah took an online government course just to exempt her from one of the credits that she had to take from a distance when we were there, and she was taught the course was focusing for a portion of it on power and authority. We read together a fascinating essay or monograph on the Eisenhower presidency, and how Eisenhower went from the army to the White House, and how hard it was for him to get used to the fact that in the army, in a military structure where you do have full, power to make the person under you and the person under them and the person under them do exactly what you say without explaining it, how he had to learn to translate from military authority to the diplomacy that is required even in the White House, or at least then, to gather consensus and to get people around the table to think that your idea makes sense. And according to this monograph, that the first few months of his presidency, he was frustrated that people were not just responding when he snapped, because as general, when he snapped, people responded instantly, right? He didn't have to convince anyone, but even in the White House, he had to convince, right? So some of the comments on the table, and I see your hand, Bert, I'll get to you in a second, are reading Pharaoh. It's great. I had never thought of this. I'm so grateful for these comments. It's almost a bringing down before we see Pharaoh's downfall of Pharaoh's Pharaohness, right? Because even Pharaoh has to kind of push through an agenda in a way that is convincing, or else he's not going to be able to get it done. And so he's not as immense as we thought or as he thinks he is. Bernie?
He did have a short interval as president of Colombia, and he might have had some experience getting consensus. Eisenhower.
Right.
I think he was president of Colombia after he left the military for a short time. Right.
When the main reading library in Colombia, when you walk in, you walk up the stairs, there's a big picture of Eisenhower or painting in his Columbia robes. And so you could prepare yourself for the war of the reading room, as it were.
Yeah, I said that because I knew that was your alma mater.
Yes, roar, lion, roar, and wake the echoes on the Hudson Valley. Okay, I don't see hands. Okay, Sue. Now we jump to, Jeff, go ahead.
Hi. So just a comment, question. Never is there any doubt about the existence of the God of Israel. It's always just, to me, I find that a little remarkable that there's not a question about whether the God of Israel exists. It's just the assumption is the God does exist. That's all.
And it's the assumption by the text of that Pharaoh shares that assumption.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Tova?
But I think that makes sense. In a polytheistic society, they generally don't have trouble accepting the reality of the gods of other people. They might not acknowledge them as their chief gods, but I think it makes sense.
And the Torah is very self-referential, and certainly the Midrash is self-referential, right? Think of how we discussed this in the past, but it's been a while, how powerful it was for the rabbis to fantasize that throughout all the moments that their ancestors were powerless, and a version of as powerless and as stateless as the rabbis were as they were writing these texts. They actually wielded more power than they did, that God was greater than it seemed, that the cloud blocking God's brightness was only temporary, and that even as Pharaoh was kind of creating the power through which he was going to oppress the Israelites, we already saw the weaknesses. We already saw the loopholes. Right? So we start Shemot by, at least midrashically, seeing the way that Pharaoh's going to trip up himself. Matt.
Just, I'm playing the Arthur card. I mean, it doesn't say God in the text.
Of course not. That's why, listen, Rashi agrees with Arthur here in some ways. Rashi at least is not saying, like, that's what's interesting about him saying V'rabotenu darshu, even though on the last 2 verses ago, he quotes from the same Gemara and doesn't say that, right? No. Rashi agrees with Arthur's critique of Rashi here on some level. Okay, so now the v'ala min haaretz, right? Which means, and it's in either an and or an or, meaning they'll fight with their enemies and then leave, or Everett Fox is translating it as they'll fight with their enemies, or instead of fight with their enemies, they'll just be so numerous that they're going to leave without asking permission. Rashi.
V'ala min haaretz al karchenu.
You know what al korach means? Against our will. It's a Talmudic term, used kind of in argumentation, like al korchacha, that you can't not but admit that this argument is strong, because you have to accept it even if you don't want to accept it. So they're going to leave the land al korchenu, not with our permission. And now he gives us another, the Rabbi.
Rabotenu darshu, and I just want to say that he doesn't always say Rabotenu darshu when he's telling us what the Rabotenu darshu. It's right. Kind of funny. All of a sudden, in this particular Rashi, he's sort of like, referring to the Rabotenu.
It's a bit of a window, we presume, into Rashi's recognizing when his dip into the Midrashic sea is farther away from Pshat than he's willing to claim as a Pashtan. Right? Barry. But 1 second, so Barry.
Before we go further, we're talking about that they will leave. The Israelite will leave. My translation says it's that they will make us leave.
So hold on. We haven't gotten there yet. Go ahead.
Okay. Go ahead, me.
Yeah, Sue.
Okay. Ki adam shemekalel atzmo v'tola kalilato ba'acherim. והרי כאילו כתב ועלינו מן הארץ והם ירשו.
הם ירשו אותה.
Yerashua.
Okay, so in that same page of Talmud, if you're in our book, you keep seeing the same footnote 7 because the editors don't keep writing the citation. So it's back to footnote 7, which is Sota chapter 11. What is this like?
It is like, I lost myself. It's like when somebody curses themselves and then hangs that curse on others.
Or I would read it. You're right. I think the intent is slightly different. When a person unintentionally, unwittingly curses himself by hanging the curse on others.
Okay. It's as if he wrote whatever that word was. And they went up from the land. They will go up from the land.
We will. Alinu.
And we will go up from the land, and they will, something that I don't understand.
They will inherit it. They will inherit Egypt, right? So Rashi's saying, Pharaoh's saying, they are going to leave the land.
And we will get it from them, not to worry.
No. So the verse seems to say that the nation, the Israelites, will leave the land. What's interesting is that in the pshat of the verse, he's not cursing them. he's fearful that they're going to leave and he's going to lose his economic force. What Rashi is saying is what he is saying that what happened to the Israelites, he's in a sense kind of cursing himself. It's as if he's saying, and we, God forbid, are going to leave the land and they will inherit it, right? He can't bring himself to say, and it's hard to know because Rashi did not live in an age of Freud. If Rashi is presuming that Pharaoh is doing this slip up consciously or unconsciously, he can't bring himself to say the thing he's most afraid of. He's not most afraid of their leaving the land. He's most afraid of them conquering us and forcing us to leave the land, right? But he can't say that. So he, instead of saying the worst thing that can happen to the Egyptians, he hangs it on the Israelites, right? And they're going to leave the land, meaning I'm afraid that we're going to leave the land, because it's as close as he can get to saying what he's most scared of. Everyone get kind of the move there, Larry?
This is a real reach. And my source for this is the famous Esther Makot rap written by Rav Raphael Aviva ben Pinchas, the Rap Rav. That's a joke, but anyways. And I can't cite the verse, but obviously we took this from Shemot. In the final, just before the final plague, Paro said, "Go, but beware. You'll die if see my face you dare." And then I have a retort. Moshe said, "You've spoken true, but the death you speak shall be for you." So that's kind of an example of what Rashi is talking about. That you give it's an inverse. You give a curse for others, but really it's a curse for yourself. So I'm sure there are plenty of other examples in the Torah or Tanakh.
Right. And I think it's working on two levels simultaneously, or it could work on two levels simultaneously. Just to split apart these subtleties, it could work on a level of, I say something about someone else, and then it's going to boomerang back to me, right? Which is a phenomenon I'm sure you can all identify with, right? Or it's, since I can't bring myself to say something about me or us because it's too terrible to bear, I say it about them, but what I really mean is about us. Now, I'll tell you something interesting in the Talmud. When the Talmud is referring to calamities that might befall the Israelites, and this is extremely hard to figure out until you figure it out, when it's talking about what might happen to the Jews, the Talmud refers to them as Sonei Yisrael, the haters of Israel. But the Talmud means by Sonei Yisrael, the haters of Israel, Israel. So until you figure it out, it's like being in Bulgaria where this means no and this means yes. So the Talmud, do you know that in Bulgaria it's the head nodding is the opposite of what you're expecting, and it's extremely confusing. Yes, you did know this, Larry. Is that what you're saying? So until you figure this out in the Talmud, it's driving you nuts because it seems to be the Talmud keeps referring to awful things that are going to happen to the Jews, but keeps referring to them as Sonei Israel, and you're thinking, but I want those things to happen to Sonei Israel, but the Talmud just means the Jews, right? So it's the rabbis of the Talmud saying, I can't even write that this is going to happen to the Jews, so I'm going to say it's going to happen to the non-Jews, but it's going to happen to the Jews, right? It's a version of this going on here. Or it's this other psychological thing where the thing that you critique in another, or the thing that the trap that you set for another, and how many movie plot lines have been based on this, is going to be you're going to be hung by your own petard. Is that the phrase, right? Mordechai Haman, right? Haman sets up the exact pit into which Mordechai will fall, and of course Haman falls into that very pit or hangs from that very petard.
Hoisted. Thank you.
Melanie, what'd you write? Right. We'll get to Shifra and Pua soon. Okay. Anything else on this Rashi? Going once? Going twice? All right. Let's move to verse 11, to a story we know well, and a story that is in our minds now anyway, because we're about to be in Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Okay. Andrew, you want to read?
Hi. 11?
Yeah.
Sorry, 1 second. Vayasimu alav sarei nisim laman anatobiv lotam vayiven arei niskana lefaro et pitom viet ramses. And so, let me see. I'm sorry, I'm having some technical problem here. They set the taskmasters over them to do slave labor, and they built the cities of Pitom and Ramses for Paro.
Good. And let's slow it down a little bit because Rashi is going to play with words. So Vayatsimu alav, we have to presume the Egyptians placed upon it. Here the pshat of it is the nation, right? Rashi had said previously that it could also be God. But going back to Pshat, they placed upon it sarei misim. Let's break that down. What's a sar? Anyone?
An overseer?
Officer.
An officer.
Overseer. In modern Hebrew, it's a minister, right? Like a particular portfolio, some kind of a delegated position. And what's misim? Misim is the plural of mas.
Taxes.
Right? So seems to be that they placed upon it ministers of taxes, right? It doesn't. We often think of it as taskmasters. It might more make sense as pshat, tax masters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everett Fox says, I love his language sometimes. So they set gang captains over it. I don't know what it is about the language that the gang.
That's surprisingly far from the pshat for font.
I know, unless he knows something about the word misim that I don't know.
I do.
Rabbi?
Yeah, Larry, and then Leonard. Larry, Leonard, Tova.
Well, I'm going to probably defer to Leonard because I'm pretty sure we dealt with this in Leonard's class. But it may not have been, if it wasn't Leonard's class, it was your class, that we went ahead to this verse specifically to talk about the word misim. So I'm going to defer to Leonard.
Leonard?
Mas doesn't mean tax until you get to modern Hebrew.
Aha.
So in biblical Hebrew, mas means forced labor or a body of forced laborers.
Interesting. And it actually makes sense as in the evolution of the notion, because what a mas is your obligated tribute to the master, and it can come in coinage or it can come in productivity. Great. Tova?
Or both. Coinage and productivity.
Right.
The
Tova,
custom.
start again because you were muted. Start again, Tova.
You're still muted.
Okay, start
You
again.
hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. The custom in Egypt, going back to the pyramids, was corvée labor, where the farmers during the flood season especially would come and give their taxes via their labor. And in terms of the use of the word gang, that's actually standard among Egyptologists, because we know that those workers were divided into working gangs with an overseer. I mean, that's actually the term that's typically used for them. They often had names, like the gangs each had their own names, and they sometimes signed their work with it. Yeah. So it's actually a good fit.
Great. My presumption, and then I'll get to you in a second, Marshall, is that the way that Everett Fox is using the word gang here is more like chain gang than like South Central, right? So like gangs of forced workers with someone specifically supervising them. Marshall? Can't hear you. You're muted. There you go. Okay.
Commenting on Leonard's comment that mas means forced labor, Alfred catches that, where he refers to sarei misim as forced labor foreman.
Forced labor foreman. Great. Vered, what's that like, Mashu?
I want to say that I can read mas in the word miskenot. So the mas that they're going to pay is actually building cities, not mas per se like we pay, but the miskenot has the word mas in it.
Wonderful, right? So the thing that we're going to build, and we'll get to that in a second, array miskanot, cities of miskanot, and that's when we get there, it's going to be a very hard word to actually translate. But if you think about the 3-letter root and the 2-letter root, this misken, it's not the misken of modern Hebrew of a nebach, right?
Yeah.
But it might be built from the word mas itself. Okay, good. So we're still on Pshat. They set us upon them these supervisors of gangs of laborers, Laman, in order to anoto, oppress it, like anot oto, right? Lechem oni, right? We're about to eat the matzah, is the bread of affliction. It's the same root from which we get the notion of the obligation of fast and Yom Kippur. V'initem et nafshotechem. You should afflict your bodies, right? In Hebrew, nefesh is not soul, but body or flesh, okay? With what? Besivlotam. What is sevel samech bet lamed? Right? To suffer or to tolerate, right? Which in English we have 2 words for, but they're really the same thing, right? In Hebrew, 1 root. So something like, in order to oppress them with it's very hard to translate in 1 word, with the types of labor that would make them suffer. Ever Fox says, to afflict it, he keeps going with it here because it's a singular, with their burdens, right? And the way he translates it suggests that is the there of their burdens, the burdens of the workers, or the burdens of the Egyptians that are being put upon the workers, right? He keeps it intentionally ambiguous. In order to afflict it with their burdens, vayivein, and it's also hard to know what the subject is, vayivein, it's singular. So Pharaoh built because he's getting credit for it because he's the one supervising this, or is this the Am? That the Am built array cities of miskenot, lefaro. Ever Fox translates miskenot as storage cities. We'll get into that in a second. Probably because it's lefaro, the intent of Vayivein is the nation, built array miskenot, cities of misken for Pharaoh, and they had names, Pitom and Ramses. Let me read the whole verse in Ever Fox, and I'd like to hear some other translation of the verse. So they set gang captains over it to afflict it with their burdens. It built, it's such a funny thing that he keeps going with it. It built storage cities for Pharaoh, Pitom and Ramses. Anyone want to read? Did anyone have the Eitz Chaim Chumash in front of them and can read the actual JPS translation? Wait, I think you're talking. We can't hear you. Yes,
Hang
Alan.
Hang on.
I got you.
You got me? Okay.
I can mute and unmute all of you. So if you want to speak and raise your hand, I can unmute you. Go ahead, Alan. No, you just muted yourself. Okay.
Unmute now. Okay. So they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built garrison cities for Pharaoh, Pitom and Ramses.
Good. Garrison. Anyone know the precise translation of the word garrison? Does it have to do with storage or military? What's an actual definition of a garrison, Tova?
I don't know if it's actual, but it garrison usually has to do with frontier towns, and that are in some ways military stores and military preparation because they're frontier.
A garrison could be a barracks.
A barracks.
Or an armory, or both.
Larry, you going to read us a translation?
Yes. And this is a translation, I've been meaning to bring this to class. This is Aryeh Kaplan's translation. He's usually idiosyncratic about it, and he is here too. So first of all, he puts in brackets his inferences for a translation, doesn't simply translate it. So brackets, the Egyptians, close bracket, appointed conscription officers over, brackets, the Israelites, close brackets, to crush their spirits with hard labor, period, that's his achta, brackets, the Israelites, close brackets, were to build up the cities of Pitom and Ramses as supply centers for Pharaoh.
It's great. It's like it's a beautiful lyrical paraphrase, right? Like he's translating in the way that translators do, not word for word, but to convey as best as possible what the intent of the original words were, right? And that's a great. I appreciate that translation. And yes, thank you, Rick, for this reminder that if we're trying to undergird the use of the word garrison, that Goshen was not in the center of where everything was happening, and it may have been an important place to build up storages. Okay, I just looked at the time and it's 9:33. So let's kind of call it here. We've got the verse, and you can see Rashi has a lot to say on this verse. A bunch of short bursts of commentary, which we'll do next week.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.